Hello and welcome to today's workshop, Speak Loudly and Carry a Big Stick, How to Effectively Mobilize in Saskatchewan. My name is Lynn Gidluck, and I have the privilege of leading the Community Engagement and Research Center at the University of Regina. I'm so glad you could join us today for the second of 3 sessions in our spring 2022 Toolkit Workshops, Digital Communications and Marketing Skills series. If you missed the first session that Danny Anderson from Harvard Media facilitated for us on social media tips and tricks, you can view the recording on the Community Engagement and Research Center webpage, which I will post in the chat later. And mark your calendars for Tuesday, April 12th, where you can learn how to harness the power of Google. I'll also put the registration link and description of this workshop in the chat box. If you're not already on our email list, but want to make sure you don't miss out on future professional development opportunities, drop your name and email in the chat. These workshops are brought to you by the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation and the University of Regina's Community Engagement and Research Center. While today's workshop is taking place online, obviously, and we have people from across the province, and I think even people from other provinces that might be joining us, the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation and the Community Engagement and Research Center have physical homes on the traditional territory of the Neewa, Anishinaabeg, Nakota, Dakota, Lakota, and Lakota First Nations and the homeland of the Métis. We recognize Treaty 4, which was signed in this territory, and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past as we work for a better future through the work that we try to do with communities. I think we have a couple of people from the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation joining us here today. Karen Henders, do you want to just give a little wave, Karen? Karen is Director of Community and Grant Stewardship, and we have, I understand we have a new colleague, Karen, that joined you, Carmen Foreman. It just started this week, so welcome, Carmen, and thank you for the work that you do with this important foundation. Many of the people that join us for these workshops work for organizations that don't have a budget for professional development for staff and volunteers. And my budget at the university is pretty limited. So like Karen and Carmen and others, on behalf of the Community Engagement and Research Center's Board of Directors and the communities we serve, thank you. And please know that your sponsorship of this is so very important. With no further ado, I am now pleased to turn the floor over to Jason Mercredi. Jason just started a new job with the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan as their homelessness manager. Now, many of you may know him through the work he did as executive director of Prairie Harm Reduction, an organization he led since 2013. His list of accomplishments is extensive, and his knowledge is even more impressive. We're so fortunate to have him share just a few ideas with us today to help us focus our time, energy, and money to mobilize around issues or causes that may be seen by some as controversial. Few people are more skilled at dealing with internal politics and government, community, and media relations than Jason. So over to you now, Jason, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Just going to bring up, share my screen here. Okay, so I notoriously talk too fast. I am going to try my best not to do that. All right, so today I'm talking to you about basically about community mobilization, what that effectively means. And how to carry it out. Some of the concepts I'm going to talk about are going to be fairly high and not go into details, and some of them are going to go kind of into the weeds a bit. So you'll just follow me along, and if you don't mind putting your questions in the chat, so that at the end I can't really see them. So at the end, while I'm running the presentation, so at the end I can answer them as best I can. If there's something really pressing, if you could unmute yourself and just ask the question. Some of the stuff I'm going to talk about may be triggering for you. They may be uncomfortable. So I'm going to talk about overdoses. I'm going to talk about racial injustice. I'm going to talk about government relations. I'm going to talk about lateral violence. And so if that's kind of trigger for you, I just want you to be prepared for that as we're going to go down a little bit of a journey, and I'm not for saying the most acceptable thing. So, and I there will be swearing in the presentation. I'm going to try to keep mine to a minimum, but some of the videos that I'm playing are going to have some swearing in them as well. Okay, so speak loudly and carry a big stick, how to effectively mobilize in Saskatchewan. So why did I choose this title? Basically, this has been my motto in the work that we do. In the work that I've done in the community, I've been dealing with a very controversial issue in the overdose crisis. I'm going to talk a bit about why that's viewed as controversial, how that's been framed as controversial, but I've also been dealing with the HIV crisis for quite a while, homelessness for quite a while, poverty for quite a while, and Indigenous issues, basically since I've been born, because I am Indigenous. So yeah, here we go. So anytime we're talking about a social issue or a cause that we're involved with, we need to look at cause and action. The cause can be worthy, but without action, you're not really going to get anywhere. Likewise, you can be really good at creating action, but if your cause isn't worthy, then you're not going to get anywhere. And so you really need this both modes, which is a cause and an action. So what is your cause, and what are the actions that you're carrying out? Before you can do any of these issues, you need to address these bullet points that I put in here. One, is your issue relevant? Do you have the passion behind your issue, or do the people involved with your cause have the passion behind your issue? Can you keep up momentum? Do you know what momentum actually is? Do you have the dedication to the cause? Do you have the focus for the cause? And are you able to utilize your emotion? Which oftentimes is a leverage point, but I'll talk a bit more about that. So is your issue relevant? Anytime we're talking about a social issue, anytime we're talking about a community action, people want this type of image. And so when they're thinking about what they'd like in the long run, they're thinking about a critical mass that they would like to achieve. The one thing that they're not willing to do oftentimes is do the groundwork to get up to this critical mass. So this wasn't a Prairie harm reduction event. This was a Choke Cherry Studios event in Saskatoon, and it was all around the children's bodies that were being found last summer around Canada in old residential schools. And so who would have thought that you could get 3,000 people out to a march in Saskatchewan for residential school? So this is not something that I thought would be possible 10 years ago, especially not 20 years ago, growing up 20 years ago. But 10 years ago, I wouldn't even thought that this was possible. So why is this issue relevant? And you have to ask yourself at the start of your cause, is your issue relevant? And I always often refer to the sniff test. So does your cause pass the sniff test? Is this negatively impacting people, or have the potential to positively impact community and people? And is this one of the more pressing needs in the community? So at the start of any cause, the indicators will tell you no, because the reason you're probably organizing around your cause is because nobody's doing anything about it. If the government and the systems were doing something about it, you wouldn't need to mobilize, because there'd be a whole system in place and a whole portion of taxes dedicated to this issue, addressing it for us. So when I say the sniff test, for instance, when I was doing the overdose crisis, when we first decided to build a safe consumption site, we knew that it was relevant, and we knew that all the indicators that we had internally were telling us that the overdose crisis was coming, and it was coming fast. And so we had to make plans. It took us about 5 years to get up to about 6 years now, where Prairie harm reduction is now, which is kind of like we're kind of like one of the monoliths in the province. Most people in the province have heard of Prairie harm reduction. They might only know about us, or they might only know about the organization skeletally, but most people have heard of us, or heard of the organization. I keep saying us because I'm only 2 weeks in. It's my second week of my new job. But people will say that they've heard of the agency. Now, previously we were branded as Aid Saskatoon. We were doing much of the same work, but nobody knew who we were. Now, that's not because we weren't relevant. We knew we were relevant from the demand on services, from the amount of people that we were affecting positively, from the issues we were addressing in society. We knew that we were relevant. However, the society might not have known, like the wider society might have known. So we couldn't think of getting a group of this size together for a march or whatever. So so you're at the start, you have to kind of pass the sniff test. And so what the sniff test is this issue going to negatively impact community or positively impact community? Either one of those, it's probably worthwhile investing in. And is this a pressing need in the community? And is this need going to be consistent, or is it a blip in the community? Because you can have issues pop up, but then they kind of resolve themselves. However, we knew that this issue was going to need to be long-term and ongoing with the overdose crisis, for instance. And so we've been able to focus and build and mobilize around that. I'll talk a bit more about that coming up. But at the start, everybody wants this image. And so they can lose focus and hope and those types of things really quickly, because you're not going to get this. The first time we did a flag raising at City Hall, there was 6 of us. First time we did National HIV Testing Day, there was 3 of us in a room together, and we had $50. And we said, we think we could do a testing day. And within 3 years, it turned into it's a national movement now, where we have National HIV Testing Day. It's endorsed by all provinces and territories and the federal government. But it started with 3 of us in a room, and we knew that there was some potential there for it to grow bigger. So we invested in it, we worked on it, and we grew it. But at the start, everybody's going to think you're crazy. So do you have the passion? And this is an image from Colonialism Skateboards in Regina. So Louis Riel is a good example of somebody who had the passion, and at the time everybody thought he was insane, from mainstream society. And really now we're starting to see more mainstream society accept that, no, he was just fighting for his people. He wanted to keep the land that they were already on, basic human rights that they were looking for, and instead they got everything taken from them. But he was really just trying to fight for equal rights. And so, but at the time, people think you're crazy. People probably even watching this think I'm kind of insane, because of how intense I am when I'm talking about these issues. You need to have the passion behind your cause. If you don't have the passion, there is no point in doing it. If you're just doing it as a make work project or to build your resume to jump to the next thing, you're not going to get any momentum on it, and you're not going to be able to build on the cause. So you have to have that passion there. There's going to be dark times when you're trying to innovate and mobilize, and you're going to have that passion, because there's going to be everything in the universe is going to be telling you to stop. You have to have that internal drive within your group or within yourself that's telling you you're not going to stop. And then momentum and dedication. So a lot of times people will look about momentum as it's just win after win after win after win. That's not dedication. That's not momentum. Momentum is you just don't stop. And so it doesn't matter if you hit a roadblock. It doesn't matter if you screw up, if you're going to make mistakes. It's about not stopping. You have to keep that momentum going so that you can keep focused on the future and the positive outcomes going forward. You can always learn from your mistakes, but people think momentum means win after win after win. That is not what momentum means. Momentum is about dedication. And so there's one example that I can give you, and it's this video here from our Instagram page.
That's when it just clicked in my mind that if you just run through somebody's face, a lot of people ain't gonna be able to take that over and 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 over again. They just not gonna want that.
Think there's a deeper metaphor there?
Run through a motherfucker face. Then you don't have to worry about them no more.
So it's a very simplified version, but I find a lot of times people overcomplicate what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it. That resiliency and that focus and that nonstop in your face. You have to have that. You have to have that when you're trying to mobilize in the community and bring about your issue. Which brings us back to focus. And so a lot of times when we're looking at messaging, sorry, if you could mute your mic, that'd be great if you're just watching the event. So when you're looking at this, you need to have focus on the cause that you're dealing with, and you need to oftentimes refocus back on the cause. There's going to be so many things coming back at you. At the end of the day, what are you about? What is your organization about? What is your core mandate? Do not get mission drift. Do not get organizational drift, and do not get cause drift. There are a million worthy causes out there, but what is your cause? Bring it back to the basics. This should be in one sentence. We're trying to stop people from dying, period, end of sentence. Oftentimes people say, what about the morality? What about this? Fuck that. What are you there to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Do not get into the weeds with people when you're talking about your purpose. Focus, focus, focus. Even if it's uncomfortable. So on this image, you can see that there's somebody that's somebody dead from an overdose, and then you can see somebody that's dying from an overdose, but the community harm reduction workers are stopping them from dying. Crystal clear, nice and focused, and we brought the image to Saskatoon and Saskatchewan, which is what you want to do on your cause, especially around controversial issues, social issues. People try to other you. People will try to other you, make it seem like you're not a member of the community, make it seem like your organization is so out of left field. Oftentimes when we heard over and over again from our detractors, specifically from the Riversdale Business Improvement District, when we were implementing the safe consumption site, they kept trying to make us Vancouver. They said, we're not Vancouver, we're not downtown east side, we're not Vancouver, we're not the downtown east side. They kept hammering on these talking points over and over again. And the one thing we kept saying was, yeah, we're trying to do a Saskatchewan specific design for what we're trying to accomplish here. We're trying to address our context, but they tried to other us and make us seem like we were some West Coast hippies. No, we were Saskatchewan hippies. So we're here to get the job done. But you want to maintain that focus and do not let people dictate what you are about. You have to dictate this yourself. And then you need to have the emotion. So here's one of the memes from Prairie Harm Reduction that I did, which is hi, I'm Ricky Bobby, and if you don't carry naloxone, then fuck you. You have to have that type of emotion when you're doing this type of work. When you're trying to get social action in place, you have to have emotion. It doesn't have to be the aggressive emotion that I seem to embody, but you need to have the emotion in the work you're doing. One, that's going to inspire people to rally around you. Two, you have to be your authentic self. You're going to be working in a very emotional space. You have to be able to be who you are. And this is something that the organization struggled with, Prairie Harm Reduction struggled with when I first became executive director. I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I'm very unapologetic about the stances that I have, and they used to take a very middle of the road route. That also corresponded to one of our lowest fundraising years. That also corresponded to nobody in the community knowing what we're doing. We had a hard time recruiting. It was a whole issue because we weren't clear on who we are. And when I became leader, I said, don't try to change who I am as a leader. Keep me who I am and let me be me. And that was probably the biggest benefit. Anytime we have a leadership, anytime you have leadership, you have to let that leader be who they are, whether it's a group of people or an individual. You have to let them be themselves. Do not try to shape them into what you're comfortable with or what you're used to. Especially in Saskatchewan, what people are used to in a leader is usually kind of quiet and they don't rock the boat. And so when we're talking about a cause, you have to have the emotion behind it. It's really what's going to fuel you, and you have to feel both sets. So oftentimes people will say things like, "We need to do social change through love." Totally, but that totally obliterates the anger that exists in community around racial injustice, around the overdose crisis, around HIV, around domestic violence. There's a lot of anger around these issues, and you have to have that duality of both the love and the anger. When you're doing it, you have to address both and acknowledge both. You can't just pretend that it's all sunshine and rainbows and that the stuff you're dealing with isn't emotionally charged. I think that's a big mistake that a lot of places make, and a lot of organizations make, a lot of people make when they're trying to rally people around the cause, is they want to be emotionless. Nobody gets behind Malba-Toast, but yet we keep trying to promote Malba-Toast. And so when you're looking at leadership, and how to lead a cause and how to organize around a cause, you have to have that duality of the emotions. So here's a quote from Malcolm X. Early in life, I learned that if you want something, you had better make some noise. So oftentimes when we're talking about social change, people will focus on the civil rights movement, especially in Canada. People will focus on the American civil rights movement. And why do they focus on the American civil rights movement? One is they can say that that's a them issue, not an us issue. And then they get to focus on an amazing leader, one of my personal heroes, Martin Luther King Jr., around how he led, which was, you know, nonviolence and peaceful protests and all those types of things. People often neglect to acknowledge the presence that Malcolm X had in American civil rights movement, and the Nation of Islam had in the American civil rights movement. This was an organization. This was a man who was young. He didn't take a lot of shit. He was very well articulate. He was very well organized, and he did not apologize for who he was and what they were about. And you had both those directly contributed to the mobilization around civil rights, the civil rights movement. Malcolm X made people in power feel very uncomfortable, just like MLK did. But Malcolm X, the reason I chose a Malcolm X quote versus a MLK quote is because we often forget about that duality of social change. You need a bit more of the extremist element and the progressive element, and they have to work in tandem together, which is often a struggle within the cause. But you need to mobilize both those. That duality is needed. And the reason oftentimes people will focus on the American civil rights movement, once again, is because that's a them problem. That's not an us problem. Canada is very good at turning a blind eye, and especially in Saskatchewan, is very good at turning a blind eye to social issues and important causes, because we don't want to admit that we have this underlying current of racism within our community. And so we have to address it head on. So now let's talk about what brings us to your organization. So when you're organizing around a social issue, there's this element of internal politics, and I find that nobody talks about the internal politics within social movements enough, or at least not in the right setting. They'll do it on Twitter, they'll do it on Facebook or Instagram. They'll call each other out, but they don't deal with it internally. So there's closed door discussions and there's public discussions. You need to know the difference between the two when you're trying to mobilize around an issue. And you need to sniff out the people that are there just to build their resume. The people that are just there to build their resume, and there's multiple ways to build your resume. There's professional capital, which is I got the title of executive director, or coordinator or whatever, and then there's social capital, and social resume builders that are very interested in nitpicking on the social issues. And don't get me wrong, you have to have intense discussions about language. You have to have the intense discussions about direction of the organization. Everybody there has to sign off on it. Everybody that's involved in the inner circle needs to sign off what you're doing and fully back it, no matter what. And there's going to be times where you're definitely going to be tested, and there's going to be times where you have disagreements, but that's where you need to have closed door discussions. So that means you need to schedule time for those discussions. So the benefit of having a organization like a CBO around a social movement is there is actual scheduled time for those discussions at board meetings and those types of things, and staff meetings. But oftentimes when you're dealing with a social issue that is either a newer group, a younger group, or they're not an official organization, it's just people coming together. And that's oftentimes how CBOs start, is it's people from the community coming together. They don't have time scheduled in to address the social issues you're doing. Within an organization, you can have bylaws and those types of things. Even if you are not incorporated, you need to have some form of documentation around what you're doing, and everybody has to sign off on the agreement. That doesn't mean you get consensus. That means everybody agrees to what you are setting out as your goals and your actionable items. That does not mean consensus. I cannot stress this enough. Consensus is the killer of social movements, and it's the killer of progressive movements. The reason it's the killer for that is because there are competing priorities, and you're going to have people that are trying to hold the organization or the cause back because they're uncomfortable with the aggression, with the direction that you're going. And there's going to be people that are trying to push too far forward, the so-called cart before the horse. I'm a notorious cart before the horse guy. I'm like, we're going to do this, and it's like, how and who's going to actually do that? So I've had to do a lot of work over the past number of years to scale back and really make actionable items and plans with set out timelines that we're going to do this. The importance of the timelines on any cause that you are doing is it holds everybody accountable. There's always a reason not to do something. there is always one reason, and that should be the most important reason to do something, because it's the right thing to do. So timelines, hold yourself accountable. When we were announcing the consumption site, I can tell you that I had people in my ear and they were making me get cold feet. But I was lucky that I had Kayla DeMong, who's now the executive Prairie harm reduction, saying, fuck those people, let's do this. And it's a good thing that I listened to her, because we had set out timelines for announcements, and we had let everybody know that. And so we got to, once we set the timelines, we got to hold each other accountable and said, we're announcing on this date and we're going ahead with it no matter what. And we kept doing that on everything we were doing. Community consultations, we did that on our application deadline. And then on top of that, we've done that internally now. We've shifted that to our media plan. So we need to be responsive in our media plan and our community engagement plan, but we have to have timelines around that. And timelines is as soon as you can, because if you're actually involved with social change and a real movement that is really worthwhile, time is lives and time is money. And so you need to be quick on the draw. But in order for any of that to happen, you have to deal with the internal politics and the call out culture. People that call out, if you have a member in your group that's starting to call out your group publicly, so, and usually it's these are people that are they're not okay. They're very confrontational, and they'll yell at you and they'll do these types of things when you're around them. But they actually don't want to come to a conclusion. They don't want to work through it and come to it. So they'll often back out, and then they'll start throwing up, slinging mud on social media. You need to cut those people out immediately out of your group. Those are cancers. Do not try to bring them in and have a discussion. All they're going to do is fuel their next rant online about your cause, and it's going to derail the whole thing, because those people are not actually interested in the cause. They are interested in themselves and their own social credit resume. You need to ice those people out as quickly as possible. That is something that is difficult to do when you're talking about community mobilization, because we come from this logic that we need to lift everybody up. Some people are trying to pull you off the rails, though. They're not about lifting the community up. They're about lifting themselves up, and you have to get rid of those people as soon as humanly possible. While you're dealing with the internal politics, there's this thing that happened in community, and it still happens today, where it's this decision making by consensus. So if your issue is really that pressing, you need to have a wartime chief. So, for instance, on the overdose crisis, talk to anybody that's on the front line. They will use language that is very similar to soldiers with PTSD, because that's what it feels like. We're in a war. And so when you're in these types of moments where you are in wartime strategy and you are feeling like you're under the gun and it really is life or death, you need to get one decision maker. So times of conflict, First Nations, tribes would go from making decisions through elders and through collaborative approach, and they would appoint one person as the wartime chief. The reason for that person being appointed wartime chief is so that you can make decisions as quickly as possible, and you don't spend time in worthless discussions. During the pandemic, we had this group in Saskatoon Interagency Response. At the start, we were super hyper focused, and our decision-making structure was very lean. But we started to get very quick and adaptive and aggressive in our approach of what we were doing, and we got a bunch of shit done. The Saskatoon Tribal Council Health Center in Saskatoon, which is their homeless shelter, that came about from that time when everybody was super action-oriented during the interagency response early in the pandemic. But what started to happen when we started to get a lot of progression, and some of the people that claimed to be the most progressive within the movement started to derail it because they got uncomfortable with the pacing, because they themselves couldn't keep up with the social pacing that we were accomplishing. So what did they do? They tried to delineate they tried to make a decision-making by consensus approach. So there became a lot more discussions, and what ended up happening was we became really bogged down, and very quickly the group became very irrelevant, because we were no longer focused on action about the community. We became more about keeping people within the inner sanctum happy. And there are always people that will be uncomfortable with conflict. And if you're dealing with controversial issues, those people will rise up and they will try to claim space, and it will be under the guise of inclusion. It is not about that. It's about their own uncomfortableness, and it's about their own fragility. So when you're looking at this group, these are just stock photos. who is the best, who's the best person to be leading this? Yeah, that's a very good question your organization needs to ask. When I became executive director, I didn't apply to become executive director. I got told I was executive director. We were in a time of big conflict. At the time we were at Saskatchewan. We had lost a $380,000 grant, and the board appointed me executive director. I didn't even apply. I didn't ask. I was actually thinking about applying for post-secondary to get my master's at the time. But I was actually on my way to apply, like to drop off the papers to get my master's, or to apply for my master's at the U of S. When I got a call from our board chair, and I just happened to be by where he was, and he said, "Hey, can you come see me?" And he pulled me in, and he said, "You're the executive director." So what ended up happening was the organization for years had this consensus decision making, and the organization started to get stagnant. And it wasn't about growth, it wasn't about change, it wasn't about effective policy, it was about our own internal drama and bullshit. And so what ended up happening when I became executive director was really quickly I learned that I didn't actually have any authority to make any decisions. And so I went to the board and said, "You need to give me the authority to make these decisions." And that was a scary thing for the board to do, but they did it. And basically every operational decision went through me. Any budgetary stuff I had to obviously go to the board for, but any operational decision, any media stuff, I just got to deal with. I didn't have to go to an outside party. And as a result, we started to get more nimble, we started to get more quick, and we started to get more responsive. And so that's something that I've always tried to instill within the groups that I'm leading, is I want people that can think and make decisions. I don't want to have them have everything come through me. So just like I'm empowered to make decisions as a quote wartime chief on the overdose crisis, I need my lieutenants and generals to be in that exact same position so they can make calls in the moment, and they don't have to come to me for everything, because they have brains and powers of their own. So when you're doing these types of social movements, you really want to look at empowering the leadership within, but at the end of the day, there's one person that gets to set the tone, at least while you're going in the early rough days, because it will be your rough days in your early part of the movements for yourselves. So detractors. So community organizations, social causes will always have detractors. So the question is always, how much energy and time should you put into your detractors? And my thought is, you shouldn't spend any time trying to argue with them, because at the end of the day, they're not interested in engagement. You won't convince them. I can speak very eloquently, despite how many times I've sworn probably already, but I can speak very eloquently, and I can be very motivating. I can be very convincing. I can tell you that detractors are impossible. They're just the same as internet trolls. They're just real people. They do not want to be convinced. What they want to do is get your time, energy, and focus on trying to convince them and quote, prove them right or prove them wrong. You shouldn't be spending any time on that. That said, you should be listening to the arguments that they are presenting, because that is going to give you the tools that you need for how to attack and plan your defense. Because when we first announced the consumption site, we had people coming out against us, and there's lots of things, and I'll talk more about that when I talk about gatekeepers, that they were saying against us. But this logic that these are community members too. We just need to convince them. They will come against you as well. They will come against you as well. We just need to convince them and mobilize them and get them, and then we're going to be that much better. No, focus on the people that want to be involved with your cause, or that are actually on the fence. They might engage in discussions. Sometimes online, I go hard into the comment section. Sometimes we'd actually have a discussion, but you can feel it out really quickly on people that wanted to engage in it and people that didn't. And so the people that don't, you can see at the bottom, I have that PSA down there. I said this was around when the birth alert system ended in Saskatchewan. So Indigenous advocates and organizations who have been saying for years to end birth alerts, why do I fix everything I touch? This was a good community mobilization. There was a number of non-Indigenous folks that were trying to take credit for it, and I thought that was kind of not great. And so we did this because this has been brought to the attention of forefront by Indigenous people for years, but we often will have allies that will try to take the credit for it. And so that was what this meme's about. But at the bottom, I put PSA: if you say some racist shit in the comments, I will ruin your entire life. You've been warned. And that's because I don't care if you live in Saskatchewan or don't live in Saskatchewan, you're like whatever. If you're just going to start spouting hidden racism on our comment section, we're going to call you out. And we do that quite frequently. And the reason we do that is because we're trying to create a safe space for our community, not a safe space for people to spout racist vitriol. And there's extreme racism stuff where they'll say they'll use racial slurs, but then there's also the subtle racism. And ask anybody who is from a marginalized group, whether it's from the queer community, Indigenous, newcomers, BIPOC. Like, you ask anybody, they'll be able to tell you what subtle racism looks like, and just listen to them, because you'll start to see it come through on message boards. You'll start to see it come through in conversations with people. I treat the subtle racists the exact same way I treat the people that are doing the racial slurs. And I don't have time for those people, and I'm not backing down from that fight. And we don't have to allow them on our pages if we don't want to, so we can just block them. So gatekeepers / crabs in a bucket mentality. So these are often from leaders in the community. So there's lots of great leaders in the community. There's lots of amazing leaders in the community. There's also, so the term that I use for this in my head, aside from crabs in a bucket, which means when you're starting to do better, they'll try to pull you down. So there's two ways to look at this. So people often say cream rises to the top. That's totally true. So I like to think of myself as somebody in my career. I was not expected to be in the position I am, but I worked really hard. I was really dedicated, and then I rose to the top of the organization. And Kayla's the exact same thing right now, where both of us started on the front line together and worked our way up. And Kayla's a perfect example of a cream that rose to the top. But there's also people in the community in leadership positions, and the term I use for them is shit floats. So not everybody that's in a position of leadership is a good person. Not everybody that's in a position of leadership is looking out for the community. A lot of people got into their roles because they know how to play the system, or they are actively contributing to the maintenance of the current system that is resulting in the injustices that we see today. And so when we were doing the consumption site, immediately we were like, it's a good thing I'm Indigenous, because if I wasn't, we knew the things we were going to say. And sure enough, as soon as we announced the consumption site, one of the first things we heard from an Indigenous leader in the community is, this is not an Indigenous approach. And I said, yes, it is. It's an approach that I'm leading. I'm Indigenous, and I've done all the research, and it's the thing that our Indigenous client people access services are asking for. So yes, it is a Indigenous approach, but they often will throw that. It's like throwing it out there to get you on the back foot, especially for non-Indigenous people, to say this isn't how we do things, or the elders don't agree with it. Well, my thinking is, okay, we need to provide those elders some new education around what we're doing, or we need to talk to different elders, because oftentimes elders, organizations can have elders, and they're really good for the community, but there's also organizations that have elders that their whole paycheck is tied to agreeing to what the leadership of that organization says. So their whole role is to just promote the one organization when they go into these community collaboration meetings. I've seen that countless times. And I think we need to expand the circle of people that we talk to, because every community has 3-4 elders that we talk to, and a lot of times they're there for a really good reason, but that doesn't mean that they're the only opinion in the community. And when we were building the consumption site, our thought process was how can we say that the elders don't agree with it when we're trying to keep their grandkids alive. And oftentimes when we'd asked to go speak to the elders, the gatekeepers that were tied to those elders would not let us, because they wanted to control the information flow into that person. The other thing we'll hear is, this is how things are done. This isn't how things are done in Saskatchewan. Look, I love this province. I am Saskatchewan through and through, but we do some things really outdated ways, and we can always learn from others. That said, I think we need to have Saskatchewan-led approaches, but if it's not the way it's done in Saskatchewan, well, the way things are done here do not work for a large portion of the people that we serve. And so we need to stop with this. This isn't how it's done in Saskatchewan. Oftentimes we'll see with non-Indigenous folks, people say, you're white, you can't do this work. That person is just become a gatekeeper. They think they're there for the community, but really they're not interested in dialogue or helping them grow who they are as a person. If they were, they would be talking to you and helping you learn, and maybe even becoming on as an advisor, helping you connect to community members. But you're white isn't a reason not to do something. I think that we need to acknowledge racial privilege and all these things, but just because somebody's white, that doesn't mean that they can't do the work that they feel a calling towards. And then of course, the lauded, we don't have funding for that. This is one of the things that I hear oftentimes. We didn't have funding to run a consumption site, yet we seem to pull that out of our ass. If your cause is worthwhile, you do a good job mobilizing those types of things, you will see that the funding will come. Funding is often dictated from government needs. It's up to you in the community to dictate what the community needs are, and to show government and hold them accountable to what the community needs are. If you would have told me that ask anybody 5 years ago, would the provincial government be, trying to, I think it's still trickled out, but they're starting to invest more in addictions. If you would that be possible without the mobilization that we had at Prairie Harm Reduction? I don't think so. And so we are now dictating governments what government should be funding, because we are trying to hold them accountable to the government, to the needs of the community. It's not anything other than this is a need in the community that needs to get met. And you'll quickly find out if it is or isn't. Governments will often fund initiatives very quickly when it'll look like a community need, but really that community has repackaged a government need and made it look like community responding to it. So a good one would be cost savings on healthcare, cost savings on social services. So it looks like this really altruistic thing, but really at the end of the day, it's about the cost savings and the return on investment for the provincial government. It's not about doing the right thing. And it's on a file that they're already involved with and concerned about. But that's different than a community need. You can see true community needs by, I can't remember that housing organization down in Regina, but they just got denied second stage funding. You cannot tell me that that's not a community need. But that's not a government priority, because they offload that cost onto communities, so they don't want to have to fund it or deal with it. But that is definitely a community need. Safe consumption site, definitely a community need. Suicide strategy with Tristan DeRocher, definitely a community need. Government didn't want to do any of these things. It was action that made them take, it's action that either got them to respond or is going to get them to respond. And so oftentimes, so I'm going to play a video. This was about the conversion therapy bills, or motions that were in front of Saskatoon City Council and are kind of happening all across the country and happen with the feds. But this is a good example of how gatekeepers operate. I'll play the video, then I'll talk about it in a second.
This is about much more than just business. This is about the thrill of wearing another man's skin, feeling his innermost wants and desires, and being in control of his every single move. That's how you get off. Now, don't you guys want to get off with me? I don't know.
What?
I want you to get off with me. Okay. Just follow my lead, guys. We're gonna get off together.
So this that video is, like I said, we did about conversion therapy. This is a good example of gatekeeper behavior, where they look like they're bringing you into the circle, but really they're about controlling you, and you're just now aligning with whatever they want. And oftentimes this will cause a grassroots initiative to go completely off the rails. And 3 months, 6 months down the line, people say, how did we go wrong? We got the backing from so-and-so. We got all this money. It's because you just didn't realize that you were now in a gatekeeper's pocket. So politicians, how to deal with politicians when you're trying to mobilize in the community. So one is you have to hold them accountable and you have to dictate the conversation. So politicians will often use phrases like, oh, you hear this from the provincial government all the time. We've done past investments. Anytime they get, why didn't you fund this? We did all these record past investments. We're doing record investments. Once again, this comes back to the sniff test. Does this pass the sniff test? So when we're talking about, say, mental health and addictions or homelessness, and the government's talking about their record level investments, does pass the sniff test. Anybody in Saskatchewan right now can tell you that either of these issues do not pass the sniff test. What the provincial government says and what's actually happening in communities do not match up. So a good example is their past investments that they like to tout are these health buses that are supposed to be harm reduction health buses in the 3 major centers, PA, Regina, and Saskatoon. Those buses got announced now 2 years ago. They are not rolling out until 2023 at the earliest. So they actually haven't invested anything, but they keep rebranding it and saying, we've done these past investments, these record investments. And are less people dying? No. Is addiction crisis spiraling? Yes. Are more people housed? No. Is the homelessness crisis spiraling? Yes. They do not pass the sniff test. It doesn't matter who you are. Every community is facing the addictions crisis. Every community is facing the homelessness crisis. And so when we're looking at politicians, we have to hold them accountable to that and not just let them dictate the conversation. You need to dictate the conversation. And so if you have a government coming out, and you're going to have to speak out on these issues, which a lot of times organizations do not want to do. There's this false pretense that CBOs cannot advocate. That is not true. You can, what the rule is 10% of your time and finances can go towards advocacy. Well, it's nothing to make a meme. It literally costs nothing to make a meme. It's nothing to do a press release. And when you consider the amount of hours that CBOs actually put in, I guarantee that all of your media strategies, even in a media heavy organization like PHR and a community education organization like ours, I guarantee it's less than 1% of our time that we spend doing these advocacy, quote, advocacy initiatives, which really it's community education. But government will oftentimes, it's not just the provincial government, it can be the feds and the city. They will try to spin you educating the community on the barriers that you face, on the barriers that your people face. They will try to spin that as crazy advocates. That's not the case. You're literally just trying to hold government accountable and educate the community on what's really happening here. And so oftentimes people shy away from being in the limelight of the political parties. I think we need to wade into that as a sector because we're supposed to be the voice of the community, and the community is hurting right now. We have record child poverty. We have the worst HIV rates in Canada. We have the worst domestic violence rates in Canada. We have the worst syphilis rates in Canada. The overdose rates per capita in Canada, we have some of the worst. You can see all these issues starting to spiral and grow. But yet we don't hear organizations speaking out on it. We don't hear people speaking out on it and mobilizing around it. We can't expect the community to get behind us if we're not willing to speak about the issue. So our organization was really vocal in the lead up to the election about the consumption site. We came out with our fundraising plan. We announced when we were going to open. And a lot of organizations that people would shy away from that. I think that these are good things because it means the politicians are actually hearing about issues in their community. And so this is the instant when I knew PHR was on the right track.
I want to ask about the safe consumption site, first of its kind in Saskatchewan. I learned that citizens raised money to make sure that that runs well. Would either of your governments fund that going forward?
1-1 for Tyson. Batista with a try. Deep left field. No doubt about it. You can only flirt with fire for so long, and it's going to burn you. No doubt about it.
So that's when I knew we made it, when we came up in the provincial debate, and organization, nobody really knew who we were. There's a group of people that did, but not the entire province. At that point in time, we had made it into mainstream society, and we were bringing the overdose crisis into people's living rooms so that they had to talk about it and deal with it and address it. And so I think that it's important that we speak truth. We talk to media. We don't just stick to government talking points, but organizations will often do that because they want the next contract. They're more interested in empire building within their organization than doing what's right for the community. And yeah, I think we're starting to see the empire builders in the community. The cracks are starting to show a bit where, they're, I'm not saying that some of them aren't doing important work, but they're more interested about getting a press release with the government and helping government save money than actually addressing the issues that we're talking about, policy issues that we're talking about, government structures that we're talking about. Like we need to be in those spaces, but we need to claim those spaces. You don't ask for permission because you're never going to get it. And my response when anytime politicians try to tell what they've already done and the situation is still deteriorating, I say tell it to the dead. Especially when they haven't met what community's saying that they need. They keep trying to dictate the community's needs. I always say, tell it to the dead. I'm sick of hearing what you've done previously. What are you doing now? And what are you doing to stop the current situation? Not, we're investing in treatment beds. Treatment beds are great, don't get me wrong, but that's not going to stop people from overdosing and dying. So what are we doing about that? So now I'm going to talk a bit about community members and media relations. So when we're thinking about community members, these are the folks that we're trying to mobilize. So where do community members get your information, where do they get the education from, but also where do they get their information from? So there's basically two streams that people do get their information. One is traditional and social media. And there's this old school mentality with CBOs, and I've fallen into that trap too, where it's all about community events. We're going to do a speak, we're going to go out and do a march, we're going to do that. That's very important, but those are like the if you're a boxer, those are like your pick shots. So those are the shots that you're picking and you're setting up for, so that you can land heavier on those events where you're trying to mobilize community for actionable items and in-person events. There's this whole round of rapid punches, jabs, hooks, crosses, ducks, bobs, weaves that you have to do. And when you're doing that, that's where media comes into play. And it's not just traditional media, it's also social media. And so you have to utilize the tools that your population you're trying to get to uses. So PHR uses heavy on Instagram. That is not an accident. We do Instagram because it's a heavily utilized tool from people that are 40 and 30 years old, some 20, but not as much anymore. TikTok is one that's around for younger people. So the next wave of folks that you want to mobilize, TikTok needs to be that. Facebook is like boomer net. Like that's where, if you're trying to get to like the gray hairs and the people close to retirement and more conversations, Facebook's a great example for that. It's also in the North, Facebook is much more popular than the other social medias. And so when you're thinking about these things, you have to recognize, where does the community that you're trying to address get their information? And so you need to be on those types of things, and online events are great as well. But I think a lot of folks are now preferring in-person events as much as you can versus online events. Online events are a good way to get provincial reach, provincial scope, but it's also good to do in-person events as the restrictions are lifted and we can actually be in person and talk, because there's some generative stuff that comes about when you're able to talk in person. But you have to think about how you're getting the message to those folks. The United Way in Saskatoon's done a really good job with their Next Gen program, where they mobilize younger people, like in their 30s, around how to donate and those types of things. That's where I got the idea for our use of social media, was I saw the way they were targeted focus on 30-year-olds, and I thought we need to do that as well, because we're talking about generational change. Then when we're talking about media, there's traditional media versus social media. And so traditional media is great. You get more mainstream acceptance when you can get in traditional media. But you have to deal with their press cycles. So if you're releasing a story on a Thursday or Friday, nobody's ever going to hear about it. If you're ever doing a press release, I need you to write this down. You need to do it on Monday, Tuesday. If it's Wednesday, you need to determine, is this something we need action and mobilization around? If so, you need to wait till the next Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday. Wednesday, you can release good fluff pieces, but that's about it. You should not be sending out press releases on Wednesday. There's a reason why the provincial government did their budget on a Wednesday afternoon. It's because they knew that the stories would die before they hit the weekend. So people would not be talking about them. So these are things you have to be aware of when you're doing media and trying to get media to buy in. If you send out a press release on a Saturday, nobody's fucking working. Nobody's going to pick it up. It's all about Monday and Tuesday with traditional media. You can then snowball the story into spin-offs and that type of thing throughout the week and maybe even the following week. But that's when you have to do it. Social media, the benefit of social media is you can control the messaging. So you can control the messaging way better than you could in traditional media. Traditional media will often, there's this thought in press where they have to have both sides of the argument, even if both sides of the argument is one person and 30 people. And I'll give you a good example of that. So when we were doing our community consultation with the safe consumption site, we held an open house. There's maybe 20 people in there that were for it, and there was one person that was really vocally against it. So the story that came out from that journalist, who is very anti-harm reduction, was that the community is split evenly on the safe consumption site. They were super focused on the one person who was very vocal and wasn't supportive, and they didn't focus on the 20 other people in. And so you have to be careful there. That said, I think media's got a lot better about presenting fairly on social issues. A lot more education's gone into themselves, especially with some of the younger journalists. And then the one benefit of social media is it's timely. So doom scrolling's real. People will go on social media for hours. I do it myself. And so you can send out something on Friday, and you can get just as much traction as if you had a Star Phoenix piece or Regina Leader Post piece on a Monday morning. If you send out something on a Friday on the right channel with the right messaging at the right time. So a snowstorm, that's a good time to send out that's a good time to send out a social media message, because people are going to be locked in and on their phone. During the pandemic, we benefited from the pandemic in the sense that people were stuck in their houses with not much to do other than social media, and so we leveraged that to our benefit. You need to do that. You need to do that as well in your context on your platforms that you're on. The other thing too is you can send out, if you ever send out a press release, I always release it on my social media as well, or I always insist on releasing it on social media as well. The reason for that is it forces the press to pick it up because they're going to see that there's online chatter about what we're talking about, and they're going to want to build a story around. Oh, the other part about social media is it's free. Like there's so many apps that are free. You just need time. And likely you're going to be obsessively thinking about your cause or whatever you're doing anyways, if you got the passion involved with it. And so the social media stuff is really cheap and free. And so when we're talking about cost saving ways to mobilize, that is a big one. And I can tell you that there is real money when you have a solid message in there. Like we fund our whole consumption site based on social media, and our donors, but our donors come a lot of times through social media. Even our bigger donors, our corporate donors, want to latch onto us because of our heavy social media presence. And so this is a good way for y'all to leverage money around your cause, is to increase your social messaging, but have something worthwhile and worthwhile to say. The organizations will often hire a consulting company and people will often do really clean looking graphics, and then they'll reuse those graphics over and over again. That gets really boring really quick, and people don't want to pay attention to that, and it feels recycled, and it feels like you're not valuing their time, even their 6 seconds of looking at your messaging time. So you need to have new stuff coming up with continually, and that can be difficult. But like I said, there's meme trends and all these types of things, TikTok dances you can get on, and you just slap on your branding onto those things. So with that said, cash is oxygen. So when we're talking about social causes and mobilizing community, you need to have cash in order to make this successful. You will putter out and burn out. I've seen so many organizations start up and die because they didn't think they needed cash, and their passion would carry them through the day. Cash cannot pay for supplies. It cannot pay for your gas. It cannot pay for your wage. You need cash in order to survive and to get real momentum. So that means you need to set a budget. If you got $5, you have a $5 budget. Stop acting like you don't. So that may mean you can't go and pick up donations. People have to drop off donations to you. You might have $1,000. That doesn't mean you should spend $1,000. You need to keep a war chest on reserve. We'll talk about that in a second. But then the fundraising. So you need to have a fundraising plan. So that fundraising plan could be really simple, that you're going door knocking. That can be really simple, that you're doing it online. But you need to have some sort of plan on how you're raising money. Oftentimes people just wing it, and they'll go with they want to go with like one event, like a gala, that type of thing. Well, if your gala has bad timing, bad weather, your ticket prices are too off, your margins go up because the place you're renting had hidden fees that you didn't realize. There's all these costs around it. So you need to budget, and you need to fundraise, and they need to be together. And you need to lower your fundraising goals. That way, if you get more money, you're better off. People will say, we need $60,000 to operate this year in fundraising. Okay, the fundraising goal is 60,000, and that's what we're hoping for. Your fundraising goal should be above that, but you should be saying, okay, if we shoot for 200,000 or 100,000 and we go less than that, we can always adjust. But if you set for 60, what will end up happening is you'll stop fundraising once you hit your goal. Always overshoot, and then plan for less than you're getting in. So because you need to keep some money on reserve for a war chest, because some things are timely. Some decisions need to be made timely. Like when we decided we were going down to Regina to put up crosses on the grounds of the legislature for International Overdose Awareness Day. We had a war chest that allowed us to do that. So I didn't have to think, where am I buying the lumber, all these things. There was community connections, and we had Mom Stop the Harm really come out to bat for us and help us get stuff for super cheap, but we still needed money to do that. And so we needed to just have some money on reserve for that, because if we didn't, if we were spending up to the hilt every time, you're not going to be able to be adaptive and responsive. The other thing is you need to be transparent with your funds. You need to be able to say, this is what your money got you. And on your social media, you should be showing people what their money got them. Oftentimes people are worried that their money's going into a pit, and then it's not actually going to the cause. So you need to be able to show them what their money got them. And be transparent with your funds. That means you get audited, those types of things if you're an corporate organization, and then talk about your budget for the. We're very transparent about the budget for the safe consumption site. That's why I think people are rallied around us as well, is because of our transparency around. And then the avoid poverty mentality. So when I talk about avoid poverty mentality, is set some high goals so that you can achieve them. So oftentimes orgs will get stuck in this mentality that they aren't going to be able to fundraise, which then demotivates them from fundraising. And then on top of that, you're spending money as you make it, which is a bad philosophy. You need to keep some money on reserve. If you don't know how to do that, like I've talked to the Community Foundation, talked to the United Way, I've talked to investment bankers, I've done all these things, and hopefully you'll have somebody within your organization that is good with money and can keep track of that. But you need to stop spending up to the hilt, and you need to keep a reserve. You need to keep some money in reserve in place, and then on top of that, you need to start setting some higher goals. You'd be surprised at what happens when you start setting higher goals. Even if you miss them, you're more likely than going to exceed the original goal that you thought would be adequate. And I can tell you, when you're around a worthy social cause, there's money to be made in the community to fuel towards the cause. Oftentimes when I talk about this, people think back to wages and those types of things. No, this is money back into the cause, and you got to generate some excitement around fundraising for yourselves. Do not come hat in hand, acting like kicking the can down the road. You need to get people excited about whatever you're fundraising about.
$22 million in 3 fucking hours!
So we are very surprised that the community mobilized around us as much as they did, and the communities what helped us get out of that mindset that hat in hand. They said, no, ask bigger, ask more. We had corporate sponsors coming to us saying, we said, can we get 500 or 5,000? They'd say, ask us for 20. The money's there. You just have to ask. You might ask for 20 and you might get 10. That's better than the 5 I originally thought I was going to get. So get that through your head when you're fundraising around these causes. And one thing of note, also have these discussions not at the big meetings. You need to have subcommittees to talk about fundraising, because otherwise your whole meeting will be sucked up around fundraising. When I was talking earlier, they talk about creating space for discussions. All right, with that, I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you for attending. Please donate to Prairie Harm Reduction, and I will answer any questions you all have. Any questions? Is there any in the chat that I missed?
All I can say is, wow. That was awesome. Give me a minute for a question.
I feel the same way. You said you were going to talk high level, which you did strategically. I have a much better sense how to do this, but some of the details you shared, Jason, are just spot on, and it will be so useful for a lot of the work that we do. Thank you.
Hey, Jason, I want to say thank you as well. Your level of urgency is really unheard of in the nonprofit world. People are really kind of complacent and kind, and they need to take a much stronger stance, especially when we're dealing with issues of social justice here in America. I'm from California. So I just want to tell you thank you. It sounds really, you send your strength, urgency, the message of urgency is badly needed. And the only other thing I would say is the other quote of Malcolm X is, by any means necessary.
100%. And I think excuses got to go. Any means necessary, beg, borrow, steal. Like, do whatever you have to do to get what you need done, and do not apologize for it.
Thank you for your time.
On what Derek said around the sense of lack of urgency around nonprofits, I think this is across North America. Nonprofits originally existed to get shit done because the government was addressing needs. More and more nonprofits exist to address government needs, no longer community needs. And so I think if you're at a nonprofit, hopefully they have that sense of urgency. If not, you need to start grinding your way up so that you can create that sense of urgency within your org. Right, Jane, yeah.
Thanks. I'm a Unitarian, so a small faith group, and we are really excited about doing more work of an anti-racism nature. We're starting to join other groups so that we can, have partners. But we know we can't be leaders in this area, and we're just not sure how to really do the best work.
Yeah, so not everybody is going to be the general. There needs to be soldiers as well, and this is where we actually, Prairie Harm Reduction, I don't think a lot of people realize this, we work with a lot of faith groups. And so there are volunteers at community events. They help us organize donations. They do a ton of work behind the scenes that they get, all they get is a thank you from me, now Kayla, saying, thank you for supporting us. And that type of work, although it's not in the media or it's not flashy, it's so valuable. It's the backbone of social causes. The worker ants or worker bee element, where you're helping gather the honey and those types of things, I think is really important. And if you don't know, like depending on which community you're in, I think that if you're wanting to get involved in racial issues, I would talk to Black Lives Matter. And I think that like if you're in Saskatoon, I'd talk to Black Lives Matter. If you're in Toronto or whatever, but I'd also talk to newcomer groups. The reason I say talk to Black Lives Matter is oftentimes they're viewed as this extremist element because the media does that, because it's safe for them to do it, because they're really talking about taking apart the structures that keep people in power in place so that we can actually have a community-led model. And it's going to challenge your organization to determine, are you real about the work you're doing, or are you on the fence about it? And that's a fine discussion to have internally, but having those types of meetings and building up those relationships so that it's all relationship, all community-led work is relationship-based. And so starting with the conversation, meet with them, ask them what their needs are, and then be honest about what your capacity is in organizations. Like there's orgs that, like at the March for the missing children that were being reclaimed, I just handed out hand sanitizer. Like that was my job, and handed out masks because that's what I was able to do for them. There was other people leading that march, right? And so we don't always need to be in the forefront. There's lots of good work to do on the back end that I call volunteers. They're either headaches or Tylenol. So they're either causing the headaches and they're eating up too much of your time, or they're the Tylenol and they're just taking care of stuff that organizations that are extremely limited capacity do not have the ability to take forward. So if you're approaching these organizations, try to think of it from that framework. Do I want to be a headache or do I want to be the Tylenol? And so trying to figure out what's the Tylenol for that org so that you can really start to build up that relationship and support them as best as they can.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic.
I see that Mindy has her hand up.
Yes, thanks, Lynn. Yeah, Jason, I was just wondering if you have any suggestions for nonprofit organizations with limited operational capacity that are looking to build a fundraising committee.
Okay, so first of all, are you a charitable status? So that determines the advice.
Yes.
Okay, perfect, great. So the next is you got to figure. Hopefully, you know what your organization stands for. You need to start before you start asking for money. You need to start educating the community on what your organization does, and that needs to be a consistent approach. I'm talking minimum 3 posts a day, 1 press release a month at minimum about what you're doing, whether it's inviting press to come in and take a look at what you're doing, whether it's talking about the work you do. Before you ask for money, people need to know what you're doing. It's too many times in the nonprofit world, organization, you get the elevator pitch, right? You get 5 minutes to talk to people. You're trying to educate them on what you do, and then you're asking them for money. They're just trying to figure out what the fuck you do by the time you're saying, give us money, and you might get 20 bucks, but you're not going to get real investment. So you need to educate the community on what you're doing. And so that when I go into a room, at the start with Prairie Harm Reduction, nobody knew who we are, what we did. Now I go into a room, I don't have to spend time educating the public or the people I'm approaching for funds on about what I'm doing. They know what we do. I'm talking about why we need the money to do what we do. So you need to educate that leverage. If you don't have much money, social media, there's so many social media students and skids that just will do memes for you. They'll do TikTok dances for you. They'll do lots of stuff. Get a practicum student. That practicum student's whole job is just social media. They're a social worker. They're going to learn how to do really good messaging and hone really good messaging on TikTok. That's what they're going to do on Instagram. That's all their job is. They're not going to shadow. They're not going to do whatever. They're focused on this so that you can leverage a volunteer to deliver those types of things, to educate the community on what you do. Then you need to start asking. And you can do it fairly quickly. If you educate the community, you start to see buzz. So say your Instagram numbers or your Facebook numbers are sitting around 200, and in 2 months they're sitting around 2,000 or 300 or 3,000. Well, you know you're getting some steam there, and what you're doing in the approach you're having is working. And so I would start with that, and then start asking. And a lot of times on social media, this is technical now into the weeds, but a lot of times on social media, people will have links and the links attached, and then it's 30,000 articles or whatever. One link, it's your donation link. That's it. So when people go to find more about your agency, they're immediately going to find out where they can support your organization. At the most, it goes to your website, but your donation tab should be prominent at the top of the page, so that if they want to donate, they can donate to you. But anything, and then when you go to donating, you switch all your social media to your donation page. Everything goes to donation page, no matter what. Doesn't matter what's happened in the world, everything goes to your donation page. A lot of times people say, oh, this other cause came about, it's really worthy. Not your problem right now. You'll support them. You can share their posts, but you need to do that. And on that as well, it shouldn't just be about you. On your stories, you should be sharing you should be sharing other org stuff. We're trying to build a community. Build up a community. Don't just be focused on yourself. Share your other organizations. If one of your ally orgs got something that they're really pushing and really plugging, you repost that stuff with all their information there, and you might even change your link to their link for a day, because when you need it, they're going to do that for you. We do that all the time with Saskatoon Sexual Health, Choke Cherry Studio, all that type of stuff.
Thank you very much.
Em, the floor is yours.
Hi. First off, thank you very much for your presentation. It's really, really fantastic. I am kind of new in my role. I'm the executive director at the Saskatchewan Arts Alliance. And I was wondering maybe if you could just speak for a moment, or if you had some thoughts around, harm reduction. It's a very kind of pertinent, timely thing to be advocating about, and it has implications for many people's real lives, and it causes, serious implications, including death. And I wrote down, that one message where you said there, like, tell it to the dead. That really struck me. But I was wondering maybe if you could speak to, like, we advocate for the arts, and I'm very passionate about that, but it's not quite the same level of urgency maybe, but it is still really important. So I was wondering maybe if you had any thoughts on kind of that messaging or being effective for things that aren't quite so urgent, but are still really important.
Yeah, so Prairie Harm Reduction would be dead in the water if it wasn't for the arts, like, just flat out. The reason we're successful, you saw throughout the presentation, there was lots of imagery throughout there. So that's because our organization, we invest heavy in the arts, like, and I mean heavy, like real money. We don't ask our artists to do it voluntarily. We always pay them a real wage and a real fee. The reason we do that is because if we're actually trying to uplift community, we got to stop this this free labor bullshit that keeps happening, especially from the arts movement. So with that though, from the arts movement, there's lots of good things that can happen. Joint fundraisers. Y'all can, like, our store is all Saskatchewan artists that we hire. They do custom pieces for us. We slap it on merchandise and we throw it out there. So we're funding the arts through that way, but then we also benefit from it as an organization. And so being able to approach organizations with kind of a bit of a plan on that is really good. Incorporate into your art as much as you can. Like, depending on your medium, maybe you're making documentary films, maybe you're making music, maybe you're making whatever. There's lots of ways that you can incorporate what you're doing or these causes into your art. art motivates people way more than public speaking, or it motivates people way more than press releases or media. Art makes people feel. You can see that on the art that we produce. I'm trying to invoke of emotion. Sometimes it's really serious, sometimes it's really heavy, sometimes it's a ripoff of raccoons and they're getting drunk with naloxone kits, you know. And so like but you want to be able to motivate people and get people instilled in that. And I think organizations, like the last person who was asking about fundraising, how can we fundraise, you're going to have to spend a little bit to get something out of it. I do not know why every nonprofit in North America does not have a clothing store. It's super easy. There's a million companies that help you develop it. And it's a good way that you can foster relationships with artists in the community so that they can feed themselves, but the other is your community is generating a lot of arts. There's that quote from Louis Riel. I think it's, there's that quote from Louis Riel that was talking about when Métis citizens become, or when Métis people become reborn, it's going to be from the artists. Like, I believe that wholeheartedly. I think we have to invest in the arts. When you look at when you look at the African American community in the States, like their art community is thriving, you know. And when it first started thriving, it got viewed as wrong and like you look at the rap movement, it got viewed as wrong and evil and all these things. But eventually, became so mainstream, and now you know there's still huge injustices, but people like there's so much art that's coming out of that community that's showing those types of injustice, that's actually motivating it for trying to get some real change in place, you know. And I think we're starting to see that within the Indigenous community, in the you know, in the queer community in Saskatchewan, and the newcomers. But we have to invest in the arts. And sometimes we've paid artists full fee, like a young artist. They delivered a product that I could not put on merchandise. I still paid them. I didn't put it on the merchandise. I still paid them because it's about that person's life cycle as an artist, you know. And there's an artist at Chokecherry named Betty. Like when I first started there, I was like, oh, we're drawing, I could see something. Well, she's exploded. Like she's done Sastel, she's done TikTok, she's done she's done like official licensed art for them. And it's just because she had a space to do it in and some investment in it. She's going to go off and do great things, you know. But you have to invest in those things. So I think you can't separate social movements from the arts. I think it'd be a mistake. And if we're talking about actually getting social movement, we need to galvanize the arts. And if the government's not going to fund it, then we need to as well. And so it's that return on investment model. So I fundraise $500. I can pay my artist $500 for an image. I can then take that $500 investment, and now that's turned into a $4,000 return on investment through the clothing store. I win, they win, community wins. You know, you have to think of that type of stuff. That momentum piece is key as well. And so when we're thinking about these things, think about the momentum that we're delivering on as well.
Jason, we have a question in the chat from Colleen Strow. How can units at the university best demonstrate allyship?
I think the universities kind of need to be torn down a little bit in terms of, you look at the U of S, completely racist institution. I'm friends with Jared Sortovich. He was at the College of Pharmacy in Saskatoon, and he was completely mistreated there. You need to deal with your internal racism within your institution before you start becoming an ally. Because right now it feels really performative when institutions try to ally with Indigenous groups. I can speak for my causes, like causes I'm involved with Indigenous groups. It feels really performative. And so that's not to say that the people that are trying to be allies are actual, authentic, real allies. Then you can go volunteer on your own and donate on your own. We don't need the universities to go slapped on our shit, you know. And so I think when we're talking about these types of things, we have to deal with it internally ourselves, advocate for those types of change, have those discussions. But all of that is relationship based as well. Like, it's not about calling out the provost or whatever, right? Or whoever, or your faculty head. It's about building those relationships. Ask them to come to events with you so that they can start to get those community connections themselves and see the value in it and start to do that personal growth themselves, so that they can come out and volunteer and do the grunt work, hand out hand sanitizer, just partake in the march, so they can start to learn and grow and build up their own skill base. We're talking about change within people. It takes years sometimes. And so we're talking about, we have to change people within institutions. That takes years. And then we're talking about having to change institutions. That could take a really long time, like your lifetime. And so in order for that to happen, if you got a good unit, like for instance, there's we work pretty closely with the University of Saskatchewan's with Dr. Barb Fornsler. I'll run through a wall for Barb. Barb asked me to be on a project. I'm there. I'll do whatever I have to. I'll do whatever I have to make it happen. But that's because Barb's done the work for us. She was doing it for our organization before we were popular, before people knew who we were. She was doing it without she was just helping us. And so I think that that's a good way that you can go about it. It goes back into, are you a Tylenol? Are you a headache? Or are you there just to get your logo out on stuff? You want to be the Tylenol, and then you can start to be the logo eventually. Sorry, I'm just going to mute my mic while my cat's playing with my keys.
Erin, the floor is yours now.
Hi. I just wanted to go back to what Jason was mentioning about stores and stuff. Previous to my employment right now with APSS, I was with Musha Pride, and that's a fantastic example of a store or a social enterprise supporting the work that the organization does, because they operate a thrift store called Rainbow Retro. I don't know if any of you have heard it, but it's it's a thrift store that the community donates to and employs queer or other people who have barriers to employment, as well as then they also have a place to showcase really small queer artist work. Like some of our teenagers are selling their stuff. Their stuff is shit. It's not worth anything, right? Like it's not, but they need a place to showcase it. They need a place to get that experience and show that one of these days it's going to be really, really special and it's going to be amazing. And so, Jason, yeah, I'm 100% with you on like supporting those young people or supporting the people who are just getting started, or the social enterprise aspects of nonprofit and charity work is so, so important. Anyway, thanks. I really enjoyed the presentation, Jason. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any further questions for Jason? We have one comment from probably one of the activists who's done more for poverty reduction in Saskatchewan than anyone, in Bonnie Morton, who's saying, I have another obligation. Thank you, Jason. Very real and relevant presentation. Many of our concerns, issues are interconnected, and we need to work together whenever possible. Community connected is positive and powerful.
Yeah, Bonnie's the one who trained me. I'm a disciple of the Church of Bonnie Morton.
Yeah, I was very excited when I saw that she was joining us today. We don't have any, I'll give you one last time for kind of any further questions. I'm going to ask that Jason share his presentation slides with me, and I will be sending out a link to the recording to a lot of people wanted to come today. And of course, I always, in the moments before anything like this, get a million emails saying I couldn't come because some crisis came up, because that's the nature of the world of nonprofit. So there's a lot of people that are looking forward to seeing that recording. I think we heard so much words of wisdom today from you, Jason. I can't thank you enough for you know, that positive and passionate words that you shared with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So with that, I'm gonna say goodbye to everybody, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event coming up on April 12th, where we're gonna learn about kind of the power of Google. And any ideas people have for future professional development sessions, please let me or Karen Henders from the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation know. So have a great week and good luck with all of your advocacy efforts.